So we'll get started. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We have a interesting next 45 minutes of session lined up for you, where we talk about some of the most pressing problems in the world of Gen AI evaluation and deployment today. So from RagaAI side, we have me representing the head of product at the firm, and also Rehan with us today on the for this session, who's the head of data science at RagaAI. We really are excited to have you with us as we walk you through our thought process of how ideal quality assurance for Gen AI application should be done on this front, and also show you some working demos of how the RagaAI product called RagaAI Catalyst helps you address some of these concerns. So with that, if you're joining us for the first time, we just wanted to highlight that this is a recurring monthly series that we have where we talk with experts in the area, leading academics, industry experts as practitioners, as well as like talking about our own product roadmap as well as features. So we would love for you to sign up for that series and join us on an ongoing basis. In some of our last conversations, we'll share the links here. We have talked about how LLMs are evaluated or GenAI applications are evaluated, diving deep into specific metrics. But today, our focus is going to be more about holistic evaluation of a LLM or a generative AI application. So with that, we'll get started. As we go along, please feel free to drop any of your feedback, comments, or questions for us in the chat window. We'll also be sharing a bunch of resources for you to engage with the RagaAI team and community broadly within the chat window. We would love to take up any questions from your side. So with that, let me share my screen and get started. Let us just start with some context setting on what we are talking about today. So the problem statement that we are focused on addressing at RagaAI is one of AI quality. And while there are different taxonomies to understand AI quality, we in the world of LLMs and Gen AI broadly, we are bucketing into 3 or 4 dimensions. Issues with AI accuracy and reliability, like hallucinations, for example. There are issues with safety and security, which would be your bias, PII leakage, adversarial robustness. And the third one, and the last one being balancing cost with all the quality concerns that we have talked about. That is what RagaAI is. This is the problem statement that we are trying to solve at RagaAI from our side with our products, Catalyst and Prism. So in the world of Gen AI, the way we are trying to address this problem is by adding a testing layer within the AI development stack. So this is a high-level representation of where QA or evaluation broadly sits or should sit in the data science development workflows. On the screen, what we have from left to right is a sample workflow for developing a RAG application. This can take different shapes based on the specific application you might be building. It could be an agentic application, it could be a code generation application, but the general workflow involves processing some amount of data, standardizing it for your use cases, selecting a bunch of LLMs or fine-tuning your own, engineering the hyperparameters before getting to market. Now, in this case, quality control becomes crucial at 2 points of the cycle. One of them is before going to production. Being able to understand where the gaps within your application are and what is the vulnerability, right? What is the kind of impact it can have on your customers down the road. Not just that, actionable recommendations of what you can do in order to address those gaps is a crucial part and an iterative process of AI development. So that is something that we enable as part of RagaAI Catalyst with pre-deployment testing. This is going to be our focus today. We'll also, another key part of the platform just to highlight is post-deployment testing and monitoring. This is important in 2 ways. One of them, intercepting real-time inference workflows in order to say, if you have the if the model's confidence, for example, is poor on a particular prediction, as measured by some of our guardrails or hallucination metrics, we can actually intercept that inference from going to the user and causing harm, directing them to alternate workflows. If it is a chatbot, directing them to a human-based agent, or even suggesting an alternate LLM to answer that response. This is something that's a big part of RagaAI Catalyst. We'll talk about it in some of our upcoming webinars and workshops too. But for today, our focus is going to be squarely on pre-deployment testing. So just to highlight the world and the process of pre-deployment evaluation, the framework which is most commonly used across the industry right now for when it comes to GenAI evaluation consists of like 4 steps, application building being one, right? So prototyping is definitely one important piece, and there are great tools available out there in order to prototype your applications. But the evaluation and iteration process can be broken down into 3 components. One of them is generating a test set. Now, test set in the world of LLM and GenAI applications is very hard to generate manually. Like asking your annotators to write ground truth to certain prompts based on like hundreds and 100,000 lines of context in a RAG application, for example, is back breaking work, right? It can be really expensive and hard to get right. So in that case, the state of the art algorithms have evolved to a point where we can generate golden data by actually using synthetic data generation techniques, followed by a light amount of human review. This is crucial to test dataset generation and also ensuring that the test data is adequate in coverage and that there are no blind spots on that front. So we'll talk about synthetic data generation capabilities from our side today. Once these are available, testing for the different dimensions that we have talked about, whether it is things like safety and security, things like prompt injection, off-topic questions from users, quality of information retrieval in a RAG application, precision, recall, relevance, and also metrics like performance-centric metrics like hallucination, correctness, and completeness are the things that we'll talk about that can be evaluated using RagaAI Catalyst in a very seamless manner. And this is not a one-time exercise, right? We'll talk about how on the platform we enable users to actually experiment and iterate over time, making sure that you can scientifically test if the iterations that you're doing, whether it is in terms of model choice, whether it is in terms of its parameters, are leading to statistically significant improvements across all the metrics, across all the cases that we have talked about. So these 3 components are what we are going to be covering today in our demo subsequently. So yeah, with that, I'll hand it over to Rehan to start to dive deep into the synthetic data generation process. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'll share my screen. I hope my screen is visible.
Yeah.
Yes. So basically, what are the use cases that we generally need a synthetic data generation, right? So there are a couple of understanding, like while you may want to fine tune a model, right? If you're trying to fine tune a model, the hardest part is not about like access to model or infra to fine tune, right? There are a bunch of cloud service provider which has provided those infra. The hardest part is having the right ground truth on which you want to fine tune, right? For any RAG application, if you're building in a medical domain, if you're building very specific to your, say, code generation process, right? So there, the synthetic data becomes very important, right? You have a bunch of sources, but what are the correct, because you want to do instruction tuning too, right? So what are the correct questions? What are the correct answers to that question, right? This becomes very important. So the tool that I'm going to show you, a part of the RagaAI Catalyst, right, exactly solves this problem, right? We are helping to generate a question and answer from any knowledge base that you have, but also validating that, right? Validating in terms of the quality. And I'll show you how that is an iterative process. Once you have that validation, right? Say the question and answer that you are generating it's not hallucinating, right? You would want to finalize that data set, push that into your fine-tuning part, and then access it in terms of your model training or model fine-tuning part. The other important part, right? Because you want to make sure that your application has a robust testing done before you have deployed it in production to any user, right? And generally, when you're building a enterprise application, you have an enterprise data set or any custom data set on which any RAG applications are built. So access to having all categories of prompt or question and answers that a user might ask helps you in determining on which prompts you should test your application, right? So a diversified prompt generation with a varied question and answering is something that you would ideally want from your synthetic data generation, right? So these are the two use cases. We have seen our customers also using this, the tool that we have, synthetic data generation, and this is what we are going to walk you through. Yeah. Please feel free to ask any questions on the Q&A sections. We'll be picking those questions at the end of the session. Yeah. So I'll just walk you over a bunch of methodology that we follow, right? And of course, there are multiple iterations and nitty-gritties to these details. But generally what happens, like just as you're building a RAG application, you load a data set, you chunk into smaller components, right? Similarly, in the synthetic data generation process, also this same thing happens. There is a loading part of the data set that can be either your PDF, your Excel files, or any large DBs that you have access to, maybe the SQL dataset, right? Then the chunking process happens. Then there are two important, the third step and the fourth step, right? You first generate a list of questions. Like what are the possible list of questions that is covering all the domains or all the paragraphs or all the content inside that particular document or the knowledge base. And there can be n type of questions or 100 types of questions, right? So that is the first part. Then based on the chunk that you have already created, the relevant chunks, you generate answers on top of it. So these are the questions. What are the specific answers based on the chunk that you have already created, right? Is the uh, is the answers to that specific question. So if you have Q1 to Q1 questions that is being already generated, what are those Q1 A1 basically answers to those specific question? Then you find relevant chunks because you want to validate and evolve those questions. What do I mean by evolving those questions? The questions can be of multiple category. And the problem with generating these questions are questions can also be duplicate. Why do I say that? Because there might be multiple chunks which has totally duplicate information, right? So you want to refine and filter those questions, right? So that is the next process that we do. And refining basically means you might have a simple questions, you might have a negative reasoning type questions, you might have a MCQ type questions, right? So this is the process that we follow in terms of evolving the questions, and then in terms of filtering those questions to remove any redundancy in the Q&A part. So very high level view that we have given in terms of how you connect to a data set, chunk it as you're doing in a RAG application, first generate a list of questions, then generate answers to those questions, then make sure the right slicing and dicing happens based on making sure the different variety of questions can be generated and removing any redundancy in the questions that you have or the duplicacy that might have, right? And we have built a process into that, right? This is a part of our SDK right now. You can run, just connect to any document here, like just import from the RagaAI catalyst, right? Just do a pip install to get this RagaAI catalyst, and I will show you a working demo. And access the synthetic data generation object, initialize that object, create a file. This process document basically does that, right? It creates a chunks of it and store it, right? And based on that, you can generate Q&A. Now, the type I was mentioning, right? There can be simple question type, there can be multiple complex question type, and I'll show you examples of both, right? And there can also be a MCQ negative reasoning type of question types, right? So these are the things that we support. And of course, we are using LLM as a method, right? A model as a method to generate those questions, to generate those answers. And then there is a post-processing method in terms of filtering and evolving those questions into different categories, right? Let me just walk you through the demo. Let me reshare my screen. Yeah. So this is how we set it up, right? This is a collab SDK, as we mentioned, right? You can do a pip install, right? So we do a pip install RagaAI Catalyst. The RagaAI Catalyst version 2.05 would install. So this is our latest version. Now, as I mentioned, right, all you need to do is a RagaAI Catalyst synthetic data generation, right? Import. And then you set your Open API keys, right? We are using Open API keys, but you can use any of the LLM models that you want, right? We support all categories of LLM models right now, either Claude, either Anthropic, or anything. The second part is we are loading a dataset here, which is a social interaction overview dataset, which is this PDF, right? So this is the PDF that we are loading in terms of generating synthetic data set. So this is a sample PDF that I downloaded from internet, like which talks about understanding social interaction, right? Talks about different types of social interaction, importance of social interactions, what are the factors affecting it, challenges in modern social interactions, right? So a bunch of commentary about what are the different categories of social interaction and what are the importance and drawbacks and uh, benefits of it, right? So what we do, we just process this file using this input data is equal to text file, and text file is reading this particular path. Right now, it's on the, I've uploaded in the collab, right? So you can access this by a content social interaction overview.pdf, right? Then all you need to do is define basically the synthetic data generation dot generate Q&A. What are the text object that we have defined? Question type, simple, complex MCQ that I talked about. And then there is a model config that we are providing, which is basically in this case, we are using provided as OpenAI and the model GPT-4 Mini, which is the cheapest model and the most accurate model in the cheapest manner that is accessible. And then we provide what are the number of question and answer that we generate, right? So in this question, we are generating 20 such samples, but I'm just printing top 5. You will see these questions like what is cooperation in social interaction, and there is answers to that. So this is a simple category answer, working together towards a common goal. What does competition involve? Vying against each other for resources, right? So there are multiple Q&A that is coming from the PDF, right? So say you have a bunch of data sources, right? You connected to our synthetic data generation object, generated simple, complex, and MCQ type Q&A. The question becomes, how do you rely on these Q&A, right? Because these are different categories, right, of the answers that is being generated from the document. The same, and we are using LLM as a method to generate these question and answers. So there might be a possibility that some answers might be hallucinating, right? So you want to make sure that your answers are correct in all and every format to move ahead in terms of evaluation, or putting it in terms of using this data set for fine tuning your LLMs or creating a golden data set out of it, right? So what we do generally, we take this data set and put on a sandbox, which is catalyst.raga.ai, which is the platform that we have, and you can access it via going through our website and just logging with your work email ID. You'll be able to access that. So what I've done right now, I have downloaded this dataset into a CSV file, right? And I have added this part, the content of this part as a context, because this is the context that I'm using to generate this Q&A, right? I have taken that as a context here. So I'll just show you. So this is what our RagaAI Catalyst product is, right? I'll show you how to exactly. So what I've done, I've created a new project. You can create any new project. The use case that we are using is Q&A, right? So this is a project that I've created, synthetic data workshop, right? And I'll upload a file, right? I've already uploaded a file, but let me upload just to give you an idea how that works. So I'll upload a synthetic data set that I just generated, right? And let me give it a name as sample synthetic data. I can write a description about it just next. So you will see that this contains a prompt, right? Which is basically the questions that was getting generated, response, that was the answers that was getting generated, and I'm mapping it to a RagaAI schema, right? context, that is the PDF document, the chunk that was being created, right? And the type. Type is basically the simple question, the MCQ question type, or the complex question type. So I'll tag it as a metadata and define it as a categorical variable, right? And then I'll click on done. So this will basically start the upload process of the PDF, and you will see of the dataset that we just synthetically created, and you will see that we go to a job status, right? Where the progress has started in terms of the synthetic data upload, in terms of having it in our Catalyst RagaAI product. Let me reconnect to my Wi-Fi. I think I'm connected on my mobile. Just give me a second. Yeah, I see that the data upload is successful right now. I can go and view results. So you will see the different type of question, what type of social interaction involves working together towards a shared goal, right? This is one of the MCQ type of question that we were generating, right? What type of social interaction involves, and these are the options: conflict, cooperation, competition, exchange. So this is something that has been uploaded, right? This was the question, this was the answer response, and this is the context. Context is basically coming from this PDF, right? So I got this uploaded onto our platform, right? Just via a simple flow of workflow. And this is also automated via Python SDK. So there is a dataset upload part also. You can do directly upload dataset by CSV. You can directly pass the CSV path and do a direct upload from the RagaAI SDK too. So this thing automates the whole process. But once I have the dataset here, what I can do is I can check for is there any hallucination or not, right? So what I can do, I have a bunch of metrics available to me, right? And these metrics are basically very important to evaluate any of the RAG applications that you have, right? So the same thing that we are using here, we have a prompt and answers already on the platform. The context is already there. I want to maybe check on hallucination. So what I can do, I can select the model using which I want to check hallucination. I can map this prompt to our own schema, like prompt, response, context. I can define the passing criteria. So what a higher score is basically the one which is hallucinating. So I'll just define anything below 0.9 is something which I'll call hallucination, right? I'll save this.
Yeah, that's the passing one, yeah, criteria.
And I'll just run evaluation, right? So again, there's a job status which will start executing this. Luckily, I have created this beforehand for you. This is also very small process, right? What I have done in this case, I've also added a filter, right? That I want to run it on only complex and simple questions, right? So this is what you will see only on the simple and complex. We have generated the hallucination score. You will see the hallucination score ranges from some cases 0, some cases 0.714, right? And you will be able to see the reasoning too. Like this is the one where the hallucination score is 0, and there are claims, right? Conflict is categorized by opposition. So you get to know what is the hallucination. There is no hallucination in this case. Like all claims are supported by context, right? And this was the question: what is a key characteristic of conflict? The response was opposition, and you'll see a bunch of context using which this validation happened, right? Whether it was hallucinating. And hallucination basically means, is the response contradicting? Is the response have certain kind of fabrication with respect to the context that was provided? So that is what you can easily see, right? And you will see there are cases, right, when the answer is complex, right? That in this case, there are certain no source claims. Why this is happening is like because one of the characteristics of the complex category of when you are creating synthetic data is that it writes long paragraphs, right? You will see the response is a bit kind of a paragraph rather than a couple of words or things like that, right? So that is why a lot of things are being written by LLM's own knowledge in this case. So those are coming as a no source, right? Entailment basically means that this is being verified by the context provided, right? So this is where the hallucination score is coming 0.714, right? Any questions till now? Please feel free to add, right?
There's a bunch of questions, Rehan. So maybe we can just quickly show the data coverage piece as well, right? Like of the synthetic with the embedding views, right? That's also a critical piece, I would say. And then we'll take the questions. We have many.
Yeah, sure. So what we can do is once you, so there were two parts I was mentioning, right? One is basically if you have the data set, you can generate hallucination scores and the other metrics that is available to us in terms of determining which part of the data set looks correct and wrong. And based on that, you can push it to the fine tuning part. So this helps you in terms of generating data set, verifying the data set, and then selecting it to push to the platform. The other part is also you want to look at the coverage of this data set. Like, is the prompt covering whatever dimensions that is present in the PDF or not? So what you can do, you can generate embeddings, right? So this will start an embedding generation process, which I've already created beforehand, right? So you will see that these are the metrics. These are the data points where I have, in some cases, I've run the metrics, right? Like you will see the metrics are there. In some cases, I've not run the metrics, like you will see, because I've run it on a sample of data set of this, right? You will see that there are no metrics on that. But what is the benefit of this? You will see that this are spread over the embedding space into multiple clusters. So you can see this is a cluster of prompts, which is basically talking about digital communication, right? What is the potential drawback of digital communication? What is the potential challenge of digital communication? Discuss the influence of technology on modern social interactions. This is mostly talking about digital communications and the impact and the drawback on this topic. But if I go and select this part, right, I'll see this is mostly talking about social interaction, social environment, right? What is one way social interactions help build relationships. So what exactly I'm able to see, like there are different clusters in the embedding space, which gives me an idea like what is the coverage of prompts or questions that I'm able to generate, and what are the quality of those prompts that I'm able to generate with respect to the answers. Why? Because you also get the metrics, right? In this cases, most of the, because I've defined the metric criteria like that, but in this cases, you will see that these are mostly passed, but there can be certain cases that a particular cluster might have failed, right? So you get a very quick idea like which are the categories of question and answers that is being generated is correct, which are the categories of question and answers that is being generated have certain issues like hallucination, response correctness, and things like that. Yeah. So, so we covered the second topic, which was mostly about prompt coverage, the Q&A generation, which is covering the whole knowledge base that you have. Yeah.
And this, like, just to highlight, this coverage view is really important, right? Because like in real applications, we're talking about generating synthetic data from all your context, right? So that gives you in the embedding space an idea of what can you answer? What can your RAG-based chatbot in this case answer, for example? If users are asking questions which are drastically outliers compared to where what we see in this embedding view as densely populated regions, in that case, we kind of know that that's not something which is answerable by the current context. So that becomes real important information for real-time guardrails and real-time quality management purposes. So yeah, thanks Rehan for that demo. That was really helpful. We have a bunch of questions on Q&A as well as on chat. So let me start with one. Are there any limitations to synthetic data that make it less preferable in some use cases over real world data?
Yeah. So, are there any limitations to synthetic data that makes it less preferable in some cases over real world data? So, see, obviously, in any scenario that you will always prefer a real world data, right? But the practical reality is that you don't have access, right? You have a bunch in enterprise, if you're working in any enterprises, right? You have a bunch of data set spread over all the places. You might have SQL of like 400 tables, right? 400 databases, things like that, right? So creating manual data out of it, which is in a format that any instruction tuning or maybe just for a verification purpose of any application that you are building, say a chatbot, right? For that to happen using real world data is a very cumbersome process. You can't do it manually. You need an automated way of creating this data set, right? So that is the reason the domain of synthetic data became very important, like having generating those synthetic data automatically, but not just generating, verifying the quality of that data set. Then you can then automatically use for your validation of any RAG application or building for any fine tuning of the models. So this is the reason synthetic data become as important as possible. And it can scale to any category of use cases, from your summarization task, from your code generation task, from your Q&A answer generation part, right? And real-time chatbot interaction, like multi-hop chatbot interaction. That is also something that we can take care of in synthetic data generation.
Perfect. So another question, how scalable is synthetic data generation when it comes to training of large scale AI models?
Yeah, pretty important, right? Like, and this is something we have seen our customers using it too, right? Like, more or less the kind of application that they work is very specific to their domain. Like, say, for example, if you're in an aerospace domain, right? So that has its own use cases. You don't get direct LLM models, right? Either via OpenAI or via the cloud, which specifically serves to their use cases, right? So having those synthetic data generation in a scalable format is very important for them to fine tune their Llama models to serve for their use cases. So the way they have been using it is in terms of generating synthetic data at large scale, right? Like in terms of multiple GBs, hundreds and GBs of data set that we have generated over the last 4 to 5 months for them, because the use cases has been humongous in terms of like chatbot, summarization, and analysis, right? So these are the cases where data set has been generated. There are verification and validation team using that data set to verify any kind of applications that has been built, but also in terms of fine tuning the models.
One question in the chat section, what first, I think these are two questions. If we have an Excel sheet of health data, can I generate synthetic data out of it? And the second one, like how do I ensure unbiasedness? Let's say there's a gender column.
Yeah, yeah. So that is, if you have an Excel data, right, you can use that to generate synthetic data, because as I just talked about, right, the first step is in terms of connecting your knowledge base. And that knowledge base, I've shown you the example of PDF, but can be anything. It can either be your SQL, it can either be your Excel, it can be your CSV, it can be a PPT too, right? So we have data connectors to all categories of sources, and some are released in our SDK. Some we are also in process in terms of releasing those data connectors in the SDK. But you will be able to do on all categories of data set. Now, in terms of biasness, right? As we mentioned, in terms of the data coverage capability that you have, the moment the question and answers are generated, you will be able to see on the embedding space where the biasness happens, right? If the content has more and more prompts, question and answer very specific to a gender, you'll realize that the clusters that is being formed on the embedding space is more biased towards a certain specific category of question, and that would be totally gender biased, right? And this will be automatically available to you on the platform, so you can do those analysis, right, and understand is there a certain bias. But we already are covering these categories of issues directly in terms of generating those answers, right? We make sure that the coverage is taken care of while generating those answers, because that is a very important part if you're building any or testing any RAG application. So this is inbuilt to our system, but just summarizing it, that you can always test it out whether how the biasness is being taken care of in terms of your prompt embedding space that we just showed.
Another important thing that we are working on as it pertains to this question is like for sensitive categories, you can demarcate which columns, for example, in a table are sensitive. And what we'll make sure is your data, synthetic data, is balanced across those categories, right? So that's a form of synthetic data generation that the team has addressed, not necessarily for GenAI applications, but when it comes to debiasing even ML applications, right? So this is the same process that we are working to extend when it comes to the synthetic data generation process. One example being, we augment our table to be unbiased across all these categories. and then use the LLM-based generation methods. So these things combined can help with some of the bias concerns that we have just talked about. So that's one. I think one or two more questions. How does RagaAI Catalyst ensure that synthetic data remains realistic and adaptable to specific use cases without causing overfitting?
Yeah, and this is what we just showed, right? You have a bunch of metrics that is available on the platform, right? Uh, and of course, the embedding space takes care of in terms of is there a certain bias in terms of the category of any questions that are being generated. But in terms of quality, we have hallucination as one of the metrics. Faithfulness, is it relevant to the context of the prompt that is being asked? Is the response is correct with respect to the context being provided? So that we take care of the quality. And in terms of overfitting to a certain categories of information that is present in the context, right, or the knowledge base that you're using, we take care of that. We have a bunch of metrics also, bias, coverage, topic coverage, that helps to determine that too.
Got it. That's perfect. So we'll just come back to these questions. We love those. Please keep those coming. One thing we wanted to, let me share my screen again, quickly cover from our side. So our goal was to talk about like a real enterprise use case where users are actually starting from application building, going next to golden data set generation, which comes as a combination of synthetic data as well as manual and automated review. Comprehensive testing. I know in the demo we showed the execution of a hallucination metric, but across the different kinds of risk factors, there are multiple metrics that the RagaAI Catalyst platform supports, and the ability to customize your own metrics. So being able to test across all those dimensions becomes important. And the last piece that we wanted to highlight is the iterative nature of this experimentation, right? So that is something that we also enable from our side on the same RagaAI Catalyst platform. What we were looking at was data creation and evaluation. For every project, there is a specific playground tab. You can, as a user, go to the playground tab and very quickly and in a quick and dirty fashion, look at a data point, change, for example, your prompt templates, change the different models that you're using or the hyperparameters, monitor the same metrics that you have been looking at, and run execute evaluations to see if test out quickly any hypothesis of alternate settings or prompts or retrieval parameters that might improve your applications as it pertains to this particular metric. And once you have this, you can run it systematically on the full data set, again with a view to seeing in what cases, like, is this a statistically significant improvement? Are there cases where you're regressing? Are those of concern or not? So that is the process which helps us over time, or we have seen enterprises over time get to better and better versions of data sets for evaluation as well as models, especially if you're fine tuning them. So that becomes a very crucial step of the process. So just wanted to highlight that as well. So with that, I think we have a couple more questions. We can take those. Any thoughts on SDG of unstructured data like images in the case of evaluation metrics?
Yeah, we have done that, right? So like synthetic data generation of unstructured cases also, plus also evaluation of those, right? So we have a bunch of metrics around there. So there is a product that we have called Prism, right? Which generally looks into the domain of any traditional AI, like apart from tabular data to computer vision use cases. So synthetic data, testing of it, evaluating of it comes under those, under the premise of Prism product. And you can look at the Prism product on our platform too by just looking there. Yeah.
So great question. I mean, just to add there, like, our Prism product and Catalyst both are accessible from our website, www.raga.ai. If you want a deep dive onto the methodology for specifically how we generate synthetic data for things like computer vision applications, like, feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to go and dive deep into those specific cases. Last one, can prompt coverage metrics be utilized to track and optimize the diversity of the generated data set?
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I think this is what we had in store broadly to talk about a very repeatable and structured process that we have seen work really well for our customers as they build, iterate, and then finally deploy their GenAI applications in production across industries. Cases where any single inference could be critical to the user. Bad inference could lead to significant customer harm, or even regular customer support chatbots. This process has been really helpful and like a very structured scientific way for collaborating and improving things over time. In our next webinar, we'll also talk about how users can actually track their application once they are in production in a real-time setting and ensure that no harm is being done, and incorporate user feedback into improving their applications over time. So that's our agenda for next time. In the meantime, we have shared a bunch of resources on the chat section of this webinar. We would invite everyone on this call to check out www.raga.ai. Our product Catalyst that we demoed today, synthetic data generation, is available as a functionality freely as part of our Python SDK. There's also a Slack community that we maintain and manage. So if we would love for you to join that and give us your feedback. If there's any questions, we can continue our conversation there between now and the next webinar, or you can connect with us directly and book a call as well. So with that, thanks all for joining us today, and we look forward to having you join us for our next workshop and webinar. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.